Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. My name is Marianne Guevara and today I'm going to be giving you some spooky recommendations for the Halloween season. So to make this video flow a bit better, I've decided to put these recommendations into 4 separate categories. And since I'll be covering a lot, let's just get started. So the first category is pretty special to me and it's called spooky nostalgia. So here I'll be going over the media that basically introduced me to horror and really helped me fall in love with the genre. So the first 2 I'm going to mention are both compiled by the same man, Alvin Schwartz, who gathered a lot of wordplay, humor, folklore that was passed down through the generations and compiling them into books for the modern audience. And one of these books is In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories. So this is a compilation of just scary tales that is put into this digestible format for kids. And I particularly love this edition with the Dirk Zimmer illustrations. A lot of these images have really, stuck with me over the years. And so you have some of my favorite stories in here, like the teeth and the green ribbon. This is such a nostalgic book for me. So yeah, In a Dark, Dark Room. Unfortunately, I do not have a copy of his other compilation, which is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. If you grew up in the 2000s, I'm sure you at least, heard of or, you came across this book. The images in the book are pretty much seared into my brain. The thing is, it's quite similar with the In a Dark, Dark Room, where it's the images that really stuck with me, because revisiting these stories, they're not scary. Maybe they may scare a little child, but they're not really scary. However, the images I still think are pretty effective. I feel like when it comes to both of these Schwartz books, you need the Dirk Zimmer illustrations and you need the Stephen Gamble illustrations. I'll post some of my favorite images, illustrations from that collection, but they're pretty famous. And yeah, like I said, they just stuck with me over the years. I clearly remember a lot of these illustrations. I know that there was a film adaptation, which I did see, of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and all I have to say about that is those character designs deserve to be in a better film. And the last one I want to talk about for spooky nostalgia is a TV show that was one of my favorites, and that is Courage the Cowardly Dog. So for those people who may be younger and don't know this show, it was a cartoon that debuted on Cartoon Network, and we follow the story of Courage, who is a dog who lives with his family, Eustace and Muriel Bagg, in the middle of nowhere. And each episode, Courage and his family are visited by these strange, very strange individuals who may or may not want to do him and his family harm. And despite being terrified, Courage does his best to protect his family. This show, honestly, was amazing. I think it did a really good job of balancing a lot of slapstick humor with just some odd and disturbing imagery. I wouldn't say that the show would be outright traumatizing. Well, I guess it might depend on the kid. But I wouldn't say it was super traumatizing, even though distinct episodes did get a visceral physical reaction out of me as a kid. I distinctly remember. But yeah, it was just overall a very entertaining show that did kind of help a kid dip his or her toes into horror. So it's really nice to know that it was visual horror that really got to me. And I think, I think it's still the same for me. If you can come up with if you can conjure up a really creepy visual, I feel that gets to me much more effectively when it comes to horror. So yeah, that's a bit of something I figured out going back to all this media all this horror media that I consumed as a kid. So for the next category, I dubbed it Under the Skin and In the Mind. So these are horror recommendations that don't have outright bombastic physical manifestations of evil or conflict, but they're more of horror stories that kind of creep under your skin, that kind of slowly get to you. That idea where the author or the director sort of leave crumbs and you kind of follow after it, and then you arrive at this realization of what the true bigger horror is. And I really enjoy that type of horror. You might a lot of this falls under psychological horror as well, and it's one that I really enjoy. My first recommendation for this category is Ghosts by Edith Wharton. Now, I wouldn't consider this book scary, especially for the modern reader, but there is definitely horror in here. However, the horror is more or less derived from the human condition found within each of the tales. So, a lot of this include fear of death, paranoia about infidelity, that sort of thing. And because that's where the horror is derived, we get a really fascinating look into the mindset of these characters that Edith Wharton is portraying. And overall, it's not only fascinating, but I say pretty effective because you have Wharton's masterful writing. The next book I have discussed in a previous video, and that is The Other by Thomas Tryon. Now, this one follows two boys. We are dealing with twins, Niles and Holland, who are very different. Niles is very sweet, Holland not so much. And this takes place during the span of one summer. And Holland begins making pranks that are not very good. And Niles is sort of conflicted on whether or not he should or even if he can stop his brother. This book is very, what I would say, Shirley Jackson-esque. He really nails sort of portraying this kind of affluent-ish family and, their beautiful estate, but also revealing the dark undertones and slowly revealing to the reader the darkness under everything and how serious the situation really is. So yeah, that's The Other. Lastly, I want to talk about Rosemary's Baby. If you haven't watched Rosemary's Baby, you have to, because it's an amazing film. So for those who don't know, Rosemary's Baby is about Rosemary and her husband Guy, who have moved into a new apartment complex, wanting to start a new life. And Rosemary, begins to have the suspicion that her husband and the apartment tenants are plotting to do something nefarious with her baby, i.e. bringing about the Antichrist. Now, that premise in itself is very bombastic, very The Omen. However, a lot of elements that you would think would be just outright scary, it's pretty hidden. A lot of the horror is hidden in this film. Because nothing paranormal or supernatural is being thrown at you, at the audience, you can read this story as a mother who is sort of coming under stress and sort of breaking with reality. You could view it in that type of way. It's an amazing horror film because it really plays with paranoia, and towards the last third, my anxiety was spiking. I would like to revisit Rosemary's Baby, but I kind of just don't want to put myself through it. And the performances are amazing. Mia Farrow is just brilliant in this film. So if you haven't watched Rosemary's Baby, you're going to be in for a treat. So now we move on to the third category, and that is Gothic Tales. And while I could recommend Dracula, Edgar Allan Poe, and I would recommend those, I do want to highlight some Gothic tales that are maybe not so well known. So I have here Haunted Castles by Ray Russell. So one thing I like to comment about Ray Russell's stories is that they're pretty lean and mean. I think a lot of people may have a bit of trouble with Gothic tales or Gothic novels is that, there's a lot of description, there might be a lot of monologuing. They feel that it's dragging on for too long. You don't have to worry about that with Ray Russell. Like I said, I feel like these stories are lean and mean. They have good pacing, and they don't sacrifice, the horror, basically. A lot of these stories, I feel like they could fall under the previous category, under the skin and the mind, but you just have to read it because it is very Gothic. There's sort of a dark, almost lustful tone to these stories, and all of them more or less kind of deal with sort of the battle of the mind and the battle of one's soul. These are just, and what's great also is that they're all themed to sort of haunted castles, but they all feel distinct. They don't feel samey. Each of these stories are a nice bite-sized treat. Some are stronger than others for sure, but if you're really in the mood for some Gothic horror, I highly recommend Haunted Castles. So the film for this category, I had to choose Crimson Peak, my second favorite Guillermo del Toro film. In fact, I'm wearing a Crimson Peak shirt. That's Tom's character in the film. So for those who don't know, Crimson Peak is about a young American woman who is sort of wooed by this foreigner. They end up getting married, and he takes her back to his estate, Crimson Peak, where the land is stained red and the house holds dark secrets. Now, I fully acknowledge Crimson Peak isn't a perfect film. I think its greatest flaw is that it is just fairly predictable. You kind of know where the story is going when you're introduced to the characters and the situation. However, I still think it's executed pretty well, and I just love the aesthetic. I will never complain about the aesthetic of a Guillermo del Toro film. It's dark, it's sumptuous. It really hits the whole Gothic aesthetic spot for a lot of people, and for me. You have, like I said, this mysterious man in his past, this dilapidated estate, and then you have ghosts roaming the halls that are blood red. It's amazing. So yeah, Crimson Peak, go check it out. You know, go into it with an open mind. And it's, like I said, if you're looking for some Gothic, look no further than Crimson Peak. We've arrived at the fourth and final category, and that is foreign horror films. So here I have 3 horror films that are from 3 different countries, and ones that I would highly recommend that you guys give a watch. So the first one is Perfect Blue, directed by Satoshi Kon. This one debuted in 1997, and we are following a pop star named Mima, who is making the difficult transition from being a pop star to an actress. And while she's dealing with this transition, she is also being stalked, and she's slowly losing her grip on reality. Now, what I love about this film, like, there's a lot of things I love about this film, but I love how it's lean and mean. It's around the same runtime as The Little Mermaid. Within a short runtime, it's still very effective. Just the animation, the editing, the soundtrack all work together to make this strange, surreal experience. And also, it's a horrifying one too. It really contains sort of themes that are very pertinent to this day. For instance, the whole idea of, the sense of identity, parasocial relationships, things that are still applicable now. So I highly recommend that you give Perfect Blue a watch. And the next film is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This is a 1920 film from Germany. This one sort of kickstarted the whole German expressionism movement that, included Nosferatu and all of that, Metropolis as well. So many regard this as the first horror film. And we are following a town that is visited by this strange Dr. Caligari and his somnambulist Cesare, and how upon their arrival, some dark, strange occurrences begin happening. Now, honestly, I feel like you should just give this a watch, if not for the fact its place in, horror movie history. Like I said, a lot of people regard this as the first horror film. And just also the aesthetic. When you watch it, you definitely get, I'm sure you'll feel, you'll get vibes of like Tim Burton, even though this came, way before Tim Burton. It's just a beautiful masterclass of filmmaking, and it has actually a twist ending that, has been done in several other films and media that came long after this. But I guess you could say this one might have, did it first. And also this has the amazing performance of Conrad Veidt as the somnambulist Cesare. And lastly, we have Eyes Without a Face. This is a French film that came out in 1959, 1960, I'm not entirely sure. But this one follows a young woman who lost her face or was horribly disfigured during a car accident, and about her surgeon father who will do anything to fix that. This one, I have described it as like a serial killer film mixed with a sad fairy tale, because that's just basically the vibes I get from it. What I like about this in particular is the cinematography. Because she's disfigured, she has this creepy white mask face, very uncanny valley. And the way they decide to shoot her, what angles and that sort of thing, when they decide to show her disfigurement, I don't know, they do such a good job of like not overshowing it, but like showing it in a way that's effective and not so much. So yeah, just a really great film that with an amazing soundtrack. I really like the soundtrack. I described it as sort of like a broken music box soundtrack. So yeah. If you haven't, if you're looking for sort of like a sad horror film, Eyes Without a Face. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know if you've read or watched any of these, and if you had, comment down below. If you eventually get to reading or watching any of these, come back, comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, bye.